If you were to ask anybody over the age of 40 when music was invented, they'd either tell you November 15th, 1986, the day License to Ill by the Beastie Boys dropped, or January 10th, 1964, the day the first Beatles album was released. The Beatles are a band you either love or you hate. I've never really met anybody who thought they were just fine. They're either so good you don't believe they're actually human, or you think they're such bullshit you don't believe they're actually human. A Beatles song might be the most beautiful thing you've ever heard, then the next track, John Lennon and Paul McCartney took too much LSD and thought that the snare drum should be mixed exclusively on the left channel and incorporate the sound of a wet boot on a trampoline, and like the song is about soup. But in my opinion, that's what makes the Beatles so much fun. Just a couple of goofy lads with personal lives you're probably better off not looking into too much. They were the most popular band in the world, non-stop dropping both incredible music and also whatever the Wild Honey Pie or Revolution 9 is.
Number nine.
If you ask me, they were absolute pioneers in the art of shitposting. They knew the whole world was tuned in, and they were about to make it our problem. They kinda did whatever they wanted, no matter how dumb, how barely qualifying as music it was, and we sat back and let them for some reason. And yes, I mean my channel analytics indicate that most of you are in your mid-70s, but we're not here to further glaze or deride their music. Many men have before, and many more will, as kids honor the time-old tradition of hating old things because old. Yuck! Where's the song about smartphone and selfies and eating a spicy chip and throwing a mouse at the wall full speed? I'm Gen Z and I don't like the Beatles because of woke. I'm too busy getting a BBL. Well, the original BBL was Paul McCartney, Bingo Starr, and Lord Harrison, the larger brother to George Harrison, who played all of the big songs. No, we're here to talk about their movies. Yeah, the Beatles made movies too, ain't that some shit? Their music is held in extremely high esteem as being some of the most important and foundational music of all time. But can the same be said about their movies? Are the movies some of the most foundational music of all time as well? Now, technically, there's like 5 or 6 or 10 Beatles movies, however, these are documentaries, boring, and this one is a cartoon, and cartoons are for babies, and also the Beatles didn't actually voice themselves in it, so I don't count it. So that leaves A Hard Day's Night, Help, and The Magical Mystery Tour. Movies that have a plot, technically, all for the actual Beatles, and some other third thing. So grab your celery and orange juice, and let's go! 1964 was a big year for the Beatles. In 1963 they were nobodies, just a bunch of clowns with their little instruments making dinky noises in caverns. But then on January 10th, 1964 they dropped their first album, and suddenly they were the most famous people in the entire world. The wettest soup in the kitchen. The official phenomenon was dubbed Beatlemania, not to be confused with the much more serious Beatle schizophrenia, which is more or less what Mark Chapman had. Their lives instantly became Left 4 Dead 2 as hordes of fans chased them down the streets trying to catch them, and well, nobody's really sure. I don't know exactly what would have happened if they got caught by the fans. I mean, we certainly know what happens when John Lennon let a fan catch him. You know, it's kind of funny to look back at how apeshit people were going when the songs are about holding hands and smiling. All this is to say, the Beatles' industrial complex was in full operation. The machine couldn't be stopped, and that's why so quickly after their debut into being popular icons, a movie was commissioned a mere 2 months after their explosive popularity had begun, and was completed and released in theaters by July. Directed by Richard Lester, son of Mo, A Hard Day's Night is actually not a porno, despite what the title suggests. Although John Lennon does do a ton of gay stuff in it.
Give us a kiss.
If I fell in love with you, would you promise to be true?
Gear costume. Swap. Cheeky.
He's probably in the middle of some orgy by now.
Orgy! Orgy! You're too old.
Now, I think kids these days would call this queer baiting. So what actually is A Hard Day's Night? Well, it's... You know, I remember I got a DVD of this movie as a child, and I found it to be utter f***ing nonsense.
Of course he can talk. He's a human being, isn't he?
Well, if he's your grandfather, who knows?
What is this? What is this?
I was 7 or 8 years old, and it was almost entirely incomprehensible, and I didn't get it. The whole movie is like that scene from Austin Powers where he speaks real English with his father.
All right, my son. I could have had it away with his cracking Judy, my old china.
Aye, but don't rush. None of your 5-bar gate jumps and over sort of stuff.
Are you telling pork pies in a bag of trout? Because if you are feeling quickly, why not just have a J. Arthur?
You couldn't get a pen in your foot, you swine.
Ooh, chatter on, son, chatter on. A touch of the writer's cramp will soon sort you out.
What, Billy? No, mates.
Too right, youth.
Don't you remember the Crimbo din-din we had with the grotty Scotch bin?
Oh, the one that was all 6s and 7s.
Don't like the handkerchief. I always have the handkerchief in my trouser pocket. You can't blow your nose on it up there, can you, mister?
But you know, I'm an adult now. I've watched some British shit. I've seen the IT Crowd and the In-Betweeners and some James Bond and Fry and Laurie and Wallace and Gromit. I can kinda understand the ridiculous and stupid way they all talk now. So let's try again. The plot follows 36 hours in the lives of the 4 critters, and I would probably describe it as a slice-of-life film. The plot is essentially just the Beatles dicking around for a day and a half while they get set up to perform a few songs on a variety TV program. But hold up, because who's the old man? The real main character of the movie is actually this guy, Paul's fictional Irish grandfather, John McCartney. Why did you name him John? There's already a John. The only way I'd ever be okay with a John McCartney is if John and Paul got married and John took Paul's last name. I don't even know what to refer to these two as. I guess I can call John Lennon Lennon and John McCartney John because I can't call him McCartney since there's already a McCartney 2. Wait, McCartney 2? Temporary secretary. Now in this scene, John just tried to snort Pepsi because they didn't have any Coke for him. Shit, I just called him John. F it, John McCartney is Gramps now. Anyway, most of the conflict comes from Gramps causing mischief for the hell of it. You know, he's quite a mixer, a hell of a character, a real bastard. They ought to nail him to a tree and let the dogs tear him to bone. He pits their managers Norm and Shake against each other, claiming Shake is only tall to spite Norm.
Your grandfather pointed out that Shake was always being taller than me just to spite me.
Which is pretty funny. His big scheme is to learn to forge the autographs of the Beatles so he can sell them for infinite money, which honestly is not a bad idea at all. At the start of the film, he's very quiet and meek looking. I initially thought the joke of his character is going to be that Paul keeps telling people that Gramps is a mad dog, but he just kind of sits there doing nothing, almost as if he's some sort of cursed artifact that radiates negative aura. For the most part, the movie is pretty grounded in reality, but there are random moments of comic absurdity, like when they teleport outside of a train and generate a bicycle to mess with an old man, or when John goes under the bubbles then appears fully clothed then outside the tub moments later. I like Norm's reaction to John's reality-shattering Bugs Bunny shenanigans, like he's just used to it now. But for the most part, the movie is the 4 Beatles having a bit of banter, wandering into different situations like media interviews where they give cheeky answers or be sickeningly irreverent with everyone they meet.
Has success changed your life?
Yes.
Like I said, you know, it's a slice of life. You get to hear a bunch of their songs. There's like a dozen scenes that are just them playing their music. There's a scene where Can't Buy Me Love plays as they run around on a field.
I don't care too much for money, money can buy me love.
And that's a scene. I don't know if I'd necessarily say it's one of the most important films of all time, is all I'm saying. I mean, yeah, these scenes did go on to become the foundation that most modern music videos were built on, so there is that. It was also pretty revolutionary for being a handheld camera movie before that was really a thing. I can't say I love the film, but I will give credit where credit is due. It made me feel like there was a gas leak coming from my TV. The scene where Ringo parades downtown is definitely the keynote. Out of the 4 Beatles, I think I like Ringo and George the most in this movie, which probably has a lot to do with the fact that John and Paul don't really do much in it at all, which is odd since they made up a whole kooky grandfather character for Paul, so you'd think him and Gramps would get into some really hoot and hollering scenarios like Bad Grandpa for the 1960s. You would think it would be a Paul story where he needs to learn to get along with his granddad who's, quote, nursing a broken heart, and teach him to be young again or something, help him get some sniz off of the whole Beatlemania thing. But no, Gramps ends up affecting the Ringo storyline the most out of anybody else, convincing him the rest of the boys are bastards who don't appreciate him and he should go parade around town and live a more exciting life. Yeah, because if there's anybody who's wasting their life and living it too boring, I'd definitely say it's Ringo Starr, drummer of the Beatles in specifically 1964. You dumb old fuck. The rest of them are bastards, though, who didn't appreciate him. That's completely true. There's a good scene early on in the train where Paul is attempting to pull some nice young ladies before Gramps cockblocks him by telling the girls that the Beatles are his prisoners, which is sort of true in the sense that fame had completely taken over their lives and they were constantly being forced from venue to venue and room to recording studios and hotels and trains and planes and interviews. That's why they have to run around in a field for 3-ish minutes to remember what it means to be human. Oh, yeah, but anyway, I was saying the beginning seems to set up this frustration between the two of them that isn't ever really resolved or expanded on. But that's all stuff a regular movie would do. This is a slice of life. Real life doesn't have character arcs or moral lessons. Sometimes you just have a shitbag granddad who bullies your big-nosed friend who plays the drooms, and then forges your signatures to scam children out of their tuppence. Okay, so if I were to rank the characters in the movie, Ringo S tier, Gramps A tier, George B tier, John C tier, Paul D tier. But if I were to rank them by how cute they are, I'll go Paul S tier, Gramps A tier, George is also A tier, Ringo lower B tier, John C tier. That seems right. Oh, now we're cooking with fire. Help came out the very next year, once again at the command of Dick Lester, but Help is a very different film from A Hard Day's Night. If A Hard Day's Night is Donkey Kong, Help is Donkey Kong Country. This shit is utter madness. You'll turn this movie on and the next thing you know you're getting buck-broken in a Siberian river village 60,000 miles away from the nearest Applebee's. This video was sponsored by Applebee's. Try the pretzel sticks.
Pub, pretzel, and beer cheese appetizer. And first,
A Hard Day's Night was a sardonic and cheeky slice-of-life anime, but with Help, they took the gloves off and said, alright, what if this time we made an actual movie with a real plot and there's characters and action sequences? George Harrison is gonna jump onto a moving car to rescue Ringo Starr from the trunk. Paul is gonna get injected with small juice and there's an evil cult, mad scientists, tanks, human sacrifice, cartoon lunacy, tigers, bar fights, gunfights, explosions, and zeppelins. What more could you ever want out of a Beatles film? Oh yeah, and the lads play some of their music. Boring! Let's get back to Paul's adventures on the floor! So like, if you had like a tiny Paul McCartney, would you torture it? But what's the movie about? Well, it's about an hour 30. Ringo gets a big red ring stuck in his finger and is causing all sorts of problems for him. An Eastern cult similar to the Thuggies from Temple of Doom, except the movie didn't exist yet, need to commit a human sacrifice, but the sacrificee needs to be 1, painted red, and 2, be wearing a big red ring. Alright, so then why doesn't he just take off the ring off of his finger and be done with it? Because it's stuck on his finger, don't you see? He can't take it off. And the jewelers can't get it off because the ring is magic and it makes their tools break, so they have to go to some scientists, but then they want the ring to take over the world.
Of course!
It could not be more simple. So the Beatles decide that they need
Help! I need somebody help!
If we play any more than 2 seconds of that song, I'll be the one needing help. Paul is gonna track me down and show me their new photo album. You old coot. Now if I were a betting man, I am, and I looked at the Beatles in Austria skiing, or especially the Bahamas, which according to Richard Lester, their manager Brian Epstein, no relation, insisted that they had to film there for tax reasons, I would bet that this movie was more or less an excuse to go on vacation and fuck around. It probably was. That's not to say they don't make good use of the locations for fun music videos and absurd comedy scenes, but these days, thanks to Adam Sandler doing the same shit, it's pretty easy to spot. Although apparently the Beatles were too high off their ass from smoking pot for breakfast that they basically had no idea what was going on for the entire production. Help is generally considered to be a more accurate and realistic depiction of the Beatles' real lives in the previous venture, right down to their actual house being in the film, which was of course subdivided into 4 distinct colored areas full of sight gags, like Paul's famous organ that rises from the floor to reveal comic books instead of sheet music, which would explain why the Beatles' music sounds like that. And of course George Harrison's White Slave, a cameo sure to make any Beatlemaniac smirk. But where the movie really deviates from reality and enters the realm of absurdity to me is that John isn't nearly as gay in it. John does, however, have one of my favorite jokes in any of these movies when he slowly dials a rotary phone for 20 uninterrupted seconds only for it to make Paul and George's phones ring a few feet away so he can ring an alarm clock into the speakers, despite being in the same room. You know, I always love gags that are just to waste the audience's time. It's like I'm in on the joke and not a victim myself. So, if A Hard Day's Night was about hanging out with your grandpa and playing with your friends, Help is about how you shouldn't put a big red jewel on your finger, otherwise a white Hindu death cult will try to comically sacrifice you. If I were to take a break from being a fucking invalid dickhead and talk about these movies seriously, A Hard Day's Night aimed to show the reality of the Beatles' new lives as the most famous people ever. Their fame had made them prisoners to non-stop touring, press conferences, and recording. They were slaves to their entertainment management masters, slaves who made millions and millions of dollars. I believe Help carries on similar themes. Where they were previously running away from fans, now it was enemies, religious maniacs, and mad scientists. You could say it was the Beatles caught in the crosshairs of the bumbling idiots of the past and the bumbling idiots of the future. One side who wanted to destroy them to maintain tradition, and another who wanted to butcher them to advance an evil cause. And all they want to do is rock and roll. They're stand-ins for humanity, fun-loving, goofy artists stuck in the never-ending tug-of-war between tradition and progress. Okay, for this one we'll go plus 10 points for overall Beatle shenanigans, plus 6 points for supporting cast, plus 9 points for making Ringo the main character, minus 4 points because John and George don't do all that much, John especially. Now, does this scene where someone attempts to shoot John Lennon with a revolver count as hijinks or foreshadowing? Anyway, we'll go plus 7 points because the Paul hijinks were a lot better this time around between the shrinking scene, the hand dryer scene, and the part where they drop a coconut on his head giving him brain damage. You know, without that coconut, we may have never gotten temporary secretary, so I gotta give this film a grand total of 28 points. Magical Mystery Tour is a made-for-TV movie that is widely considered to be one of the worst things the Beatles had ever done. You could even say me including it as one of their feature films and not Yellow Submarine is, quote, horseshit, especially since Magical Mystery Tour was a TV movie. But here's the thing. You see, he's made out of rocks. Now, when it comes to Beatles albums, I'm generally a white supremacist. Waka waka! No, but seriously, Magical Mystery Tour, the album, is one of my favorite Beatles albums. Maybe it even is my favorite. I don't know, do I have to take like a hardline stance on everything? I love this album because it's like they sat down and they said, okay, what if we did like a scary one? This album's fucking creepy. Magical Mystery Tour, now they should have called this the fucking creepy, scary album full of horrifying songs to be fucking evil too. As a child, a lot of the songs from this album, and specifically Blue Jay Way, used to legitimately scare the shit out of me because it's a scary, creepy song, and I used to watch old school YouTube videos about Paul is Dead theories, and a lot of songs from this album used to always show up as evidence. Paul is Dead was the original ARG. While you were all poring over FNAF cutscenes, I was staring at Bloody Shirley Temple on the Sgt. Pepper album cover and convincing myself that the flowers actually said Paul. So you see a car comes and then hits Paul in the head, and that's because he's dead. That's John. He's dead, you see. But these days, my money is on Ringo actually being the one who's dead. I mean, think about it. He's been wearing sunglasses for 40 goddamn years. I bet you underneath those shades are red glowing android eyes. The Magical Mystery Tour is a movie spearheaded by Paul McCartney. Now, I say movie because You know, A Hard Day's Night had a low-stakes, simple story that allowed for improv within a framework. Help was a much larger and complicated production with a script and big action scenes, but Magical Mystery Tour was almost entirely improv. From my hours of research into this film, I skimmed the Wikipedia, it seems the film was just a loose collection of ideas and sketches scribbled onto a bunch of loose scraps of paper that Paul McCartney called the scrupt, and they kind of just let anybody do anything. And of course their music is played throughout, and Hitler makes a guest appearance. I guess the main character is once again Ringo Starr, going by his real name Richard B. Starkey, who gets a fictional aunt. They just love giving them fake families in these things. Although I think they're not actually the Beatles in this one, I think they're just regular blokes. And when I say he's the main character, I just mean there's maybe like 2 scenes where he's like a main focus. I don't know.
You love the Beatles, sonny boy. All of you in a place you don't. Now you want to come to stone him, hey?
Why?
So the plot is that the Magical Mystery Tour bus passengers go to a bunch of places and see a bunch of things. They go to a British Army place and Paul plays a major and they attack a cow. There's a race where anything goes. You can run, ride a bike. Ringo hijacks the bus and races it to win. But what he doesn't realize is that if it goes under 50 miles per hour, it's gonna blow up! If A Hard Day's Night made me feel like there was gas leaking out of my TV, Magical Mystery Tour makes me feel like there's gray matter leaking out of my nostrils. You'd have to be high on pot to understand this shit. You need to be smoking actual weed for this to be enjoyable. At some point, John Lennon's stoner ass dreamed of a waiter shoveling big, heaping loads of spaghetti onto a woman's plate. So there's a scene of Ringo's aunt crying while John shovels piles and piles of shit onto her plate. It's a fever dream of a film, but I think that was literally the intended goal. Oh, but there's a really important part I'm forgetting. The 5 Wizards. Played again by the Beatles plus the road manager. I think they're the ones responsible for making the mystery tour magical. Because, you see, I do like the Your Mother Should Know music video because they're just like, oh, what if we went down the stairs and then walked forward a little bit? Oh yeah, that's good. Then what if we turned around and walked back? Bloody brilliant. I play the drums. Yeah, so that movie, that was dumb. 8 out of 10 is pretty much unwatchable. But there exists some crazy alternate realities out there where they made a few other interesting films. I think these days everybody knows that the Beatles wanted to make a live-action adaptation of The Lord of the Rings with Stanley Kubrick as the director, which was immediately rejected by Kubrick and Tolkien. Thinking they could handle memorizing lines for The Lord of the Rings when apparently they struggled to remember Help would have just been salt on the wound of how impossible live-action Lord of the Rings would have been in the late 60s. There were some other projects like a Western comedy or a Three Musketeers film, but by far the most interesting one and the most robbed humanity has ever been is Up Against It. Written by Joe Orton in 1967, Up Against It has been described as absurdly violent and gay. The movie would have seen the Beatles cross-dressing while assassinating Britain's first female prime minister, inciting a civil war, getting assaulted by a character named the Fat Man who only exists to be fat and attack people. All of the Beatles shower together, and at some point John Lennon's character would tell a woman, "We can't shower with you, you're a woman." Then the movie ends with polyamory being legalized and all 4 of the Beatles marrying the same woman. The Beatles initially rejected it with no comment until years later when Paul McCartney said, "We didn't do it because it was gay. We weren't gay and that was really all there was to it." The screenplay was reworked to be done without them, but on the day Joe Orton was set to discuss filming with Richard Lester, his boyfriend killed him with a hammer. So the movie was never made.
You give me your number, I call you up. You act like you don't interrupt. I don't.
The Beatles sure did make some movies, huh? Wait, why did I do this? Was I trying to figure something out? Aren't we all trying to figure something out? About ourselves, about the world we live in, about other people and what they're thinking and how they feel, so we can try and understand ourselves through them and know what we want. No, hold on, no, this was about the Beatles movies. At the end of the day, does a band really need to star in a feature film? Isn't their job to make music? Why are they speaking? Yeah, hang on a second, I mean, we don't force actors to sing. Unless it's a musical, I guess. But hey, you know what? These movies, for better or worse, are fun. They're charming and quirky and weird, and that's what the Beatles are all about. For all their famous, serious songs like Something, Yesterday, or Eleanor Rigby, they also got dozens and dozens of clown honk jamboree tunes. The Beatles are weird and creepy and beautiful, and call me pretentious or whatever you want, but I think there's no arguing that Ringo played the drums, John beat wife, Paul is dead, and George Harrison is Indian.
She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. She loves you, yeah, 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 yeah. You think you lost your love? Well, I saw her yesterday, yeah. The shoe she's thinking of, and she told me what to say, yeah. She said she loves you, and you know that can be bad. Yeah, she loves you, and you know you should be glad. She said you hurt her so, she almost lost.
I don't need to be friends with Ghoul City.